Welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. Depending on where you're at in the country, it may seem really late if you don't have your crop in the ground. We're going to talk about managing late planted corn and soybeans, what you can do to still be successful this year.
Well, if your crop is in the ground, you're probably out looking at it, and occasionally you're going to see what you think are plant nutrient deficiencies. We're going to talk about identifying those and determining what you should do now on today's show.
Our weed of the week is often misidentified. We'll show you exactly what it is and how to stop it on your farm. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to discuss the residual activity of certain herbicides.
Well, when we talk about weed control, whether it's in fields or gardens or yards, one of the factors that we'll look at is, does the herbicide that we're using have soil residual? What that means is, instead of just killing the weeds as it's sprayed on top of them, is there some root uptake or shoot uptake, so as that seed starts to germinate in the ground, it pulls in out of the soil this herbicide and it controls it that way. With many farmers across the country, the best application they make throughout the whole season is that soil residual herbicide, so they can kill weeds before they come up and start competing with their crop. But how much residual is there with some of these herbicides?
Well, the first thing that we always look at is, what's the half-life of a herbicide? And that means how long until half of it is gone. So if the half-life is 30 days, that means that, hey, we put out the full rate today, 30 days later we can expect half of it is left. 30 days after that, we can expect half of the half is left, and so on. And once we get down to a certain level, either it's completely gone or it's certainly tolerable by the next crop.
When we look at that, now we're not talking about killing residual, so let's just say you're putting a herbicide out to try and kill pigweeds, for example. Maybe for the first 30 days, there's enough dose out there to kill pigweeds. After that, it might not do the job. So the half-life isn't necessarily a measure of, well, how long is it actually going to control weeds, but how long it is going to persist in the soil.
Well, a lot of that, though, depends on which weed we're talking about, because, well, it may not be very active on pigweeds. It may be super active on green foxtail, for example. And then the other factors we've got to look at are, when we say half-life, okay, half-life under what conditions? So in other words, if the ground's completely froze, well, we're not ticking any days off that half-life clock. Usually these herbicides are broken down by bacteria and then they're used up by plants. Okay, so no plants are growing when it's below freezing, and no bacteria are moving and doing anything with it when it's below freezing. So those are very important factors. In addition to that, we take a look at things like soil pH, plant nutrient levels, which crop is planted, how much of the crop is planted. In other words, how many weeds are there and how many plants are there that can absorb that particular herbicide. All these factors just make a huge difference. And then there's something else too with the bacteria. There are certain herbicides like the old eradicane that we used 30 years ago. If you use that in the soil one time, the bacteria would start to build up, the kind that broke down the eradicane. So it would tell you right on the label, hey, don't use it in back-to-back years because there will be so many of those bacteria around. And what we always used to say is, don't use it any more than once out of 5 years, because there will be enough bacteria that literally they could break it all down in 1 week if you get enough of them.
All right, let's say that you pick one of these soil residual herbicides and you apply it out to your soil, and then you get no rain. If it's exceptionally dry, these soil residual herbicides need some moisture, not only to get down into the soil if you're not doing incorporation, and then also they need some moisture in the soil to be able to be sucked into those root systems of the growing weeds. If you don't have sufficient amount of water, sometimes that herbicide doesn't get into those plants before they start germinating and start growing. So people will ask, well, wait a second, I put a residual herbicide on, but it doesn't appear to be working in my field. Then all of a sudden you get a big rain. It can stop the next flush of weeds that are germinating. However, most soil residual herbicides don't have what's termed as a reach-back activity to get the weeds that are already up and tall. So if you're not getting moisture, soil residual herbicides are going to work a little differently. They're going to wait until there is sufficient moisture to actually start killing weeds.
As farmers, we love having some soil residual so we have decent control not just on the day we spray, but for a few weeks after that. Once we get a few weeks into the growing season, our crop is up, it's big enough, and it shades out the weeds from coming later on. So most of these herbicides only last for a few weeks, no big deal. Every once in a while though, we've got a really long residual herbicide, and then we do have to be concerned about which crops we're going to rotate to.
Well, I think one of the big things there too, Brian, is just why do we need this? Well, what we need is we need that time window from when we apply that herbicide and the crop is just starting to grow until when it can shade out the ground and control weeds the way nature has intended is just with shade. So that's what we're trying to get to as we're using these soil residual herbicides. What it's done for agriculture and really for the environment is it's reduced the amount of tillage that farmers have had to do. Normally farmers would go out in between the rows of crop and do tillage constantly. I mean, every week they'd be out doing tillage trying to stop weeds. Now with residual herbicides, we've eliminated a lot of that tillage, which has greatly reduced the amount of soil erosion going out there, and of course the amount of fuel that's being burned and all these things that can be negative environmental factors. Soil residual herbicides have changed all that and made it so much better for all of us that, yes, like you said, Brian, we're just looking for this short window of time to get some help from those soil residual herbicides so we can do farming the right way and much more environmentally friendly.
So as farmers, one of the things we're always looking for with a herbicide is how much residual does it have, and we want to make sure that we can use it in the crop rotation that we've got. Well, one of the other things that we're looking for in our crop rotation is how we're going to control our weed of the week. We'll tell you how to stop it on your farm coming up later in the show.
Regalia RX biofungicide activates a plant's natural defense system, limiting the effects of disease and improving overall plant health. Regalia RX complements your fungicide program to optimize yield and strengthen return on investment. Ask your retailer for Regalia RX today.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave P. Most of your applied P gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more P available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing P availability can lead to increased P uptake in the plant. That's more P, and more P. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your P with Avail.
With the success of the CaseIH Steiger Quad Track and Magnum Road Track tractors, it's no secret why CaseIH is the leader of the track. So it wasn't surprising when the competition started imitating us. But only CaseIH offers a 5-axle design to give you a smoother ride, more power to the ground, with less berming and compaction. Still, we're flattered. In fact, if we weren't already red, we'd be blushing.
Could I boost my potential by foliar feeding?
You can. Foliar feeding can correct nutrient deficiencies and sustain your crop through stress. It's a great way to deliver nutrients that your crop lacks to reach its full potential. Research proves it. Applied alone or in combination with your crop protection program, AgroLiquid products assure that when the season presents opportunity, you can boost your crop's yield potential by foliar feeding. For more info, visit agroliquid.com.
Working in agriculture over the past 3 decades, I saw a need for an accurate way to apply dry product to seed. That's where our Changing Times applicators come in. The CT applicator brush sifts powder into small particles, resulting in proper distribution. Quantities can be adjusted by the speed of the brush rotation. This allows for even and accurate distribution of product. Application at the time of planting can be used with any seed delivery system and saves farmers time, labor, and money. Remember, CT applicators for the changing times.
Your time is valuable. That's why you need a Hagie STS application system. Hagie STS products are designed for precision and efficiency, allowing you to make applications all season long with just one machine. Contact your Hagie rep today.
Now that it's a little later in the season, if you don't have your corn and soybeans planted, or if you have to replant your corn and soybeans, you're probably wondering, all right, I'm past the ideal window, at least in most areas of the country. How do I still maximize yield?
Well, there's certainly some management practices that you can do that can influence yield later in the season. For example, as we narrow up row spacings, as we increase plant population, we've got a faster time period that we're going to go from seed in the ground to covering up the whole ground and catching all the possible sunlight energy hitting that field. In general, as we get later in the season, we like narrower rows and higher populations for that aspect of farming.
The other thing that we talk to people about all the time is don't give up on your crop, all right? Yes, we may be past the ideal window, but that doesn't mean that we still can't raise 80% of a crop, 90% of a crop, and when you start dollaring things out, it's really not that bad. But what ends up happening is people say, well, my expenses were gonna be this if I planted on time, now they're gonna be way down to here. That's never the way we should look at things. Okay, we don't ever want to just set a budget based on, all right, well, I think I'm going to do this. No, here's how we would suggest you do it. Look at each individual thing and ask yourself the question, is that going to pay for itself this year? So let's take insecticide, for example. We see a lot of people give up on insecticide and they have a bad bug problem. And I'm going, hey, you're going to lose 20 bushels. I don't care if your yield potential went from 60 down to 45. You're going to lose 20 bushels if you don't kill that bug. And people say, well, I can't spend the money because I planted late, so I don't have the potential there. No, you've got to look at each treatment, each individual thing you're going to do and ask whether or not it's worth it. Now, if we talk about fertilizer, that may be a little bit different because we know that a 60 bushel crop is not going to remove as much fertilizer as a 45 bushel soybean crop. Same thing with corn. 200 bushel corn is going to remove a lot more nutrients than 170 bushel corn. So absolutely on some things, we've got to adjust them down. But on other things, you simply need to look at return on investment.
So you have to plan for success and then adjust the plan as you go. If something happens where, hey, you know what, it's extreme drought, yeah, at some point you have to, call a spade and say, well, it's really not going to be that good a crop and I have to adjust all my thinking and base my return on investment on this year and what it's bringing me. But you have to start out thinking, wow, it's still going to be good. I have to protect myself and get myself off to a good start.
All right, let's say you get off to a good start, you planted early, but now you have hail or you have flooding or you have something that destroys at least a portion of your crop. With hail, they do have hail charts and you can look these up. Just do an internet search for hail charts. Iowa State, for example, they actually have a machine where they spray hail almost every day through the growing season, and they work in conjunction with the insurance companies, so they know exactly, on average, what you should get for potential based on a certain amount of defoliation at a certain stage of the crop.
Wouldn't that be a terrible job, Brian, to have to purposely put hail out onto a crop?
But hey, I'm glad that they've done that, so then we have a real good idea how much it hurts our crop. And anyway, the whole point here is if you're thinking about replanting versus just leaving the crop, you just talk to your insurance company and they'll tell you, hey, you've got 80% probability of yield by leaving it, and based on this planting date, we feel you have whatever, 75 or 80% if you plant at this late a date, so it might be a wash. But in some cases, hey, it's really not that late, and especially with soybeans, depending on where you're at in the country, you might be ahead to tear up whatever crop that was if there's 30% yield potential left, and you've got 80% yield planting today.
Well, there are a lot of tough decisions because the problem with hail or damage to a field is that it's not evenly spread across the field in most cases. Right. If it was even, you could make a really good judgment. But when you see, wow, in this area of the field it's down, this area of the field looks pretty good, that's where it gets to be a challenge. And you think about interseeding and you say, well, I could just interseed into a certain area. You have to think through those decisions real carefully too and seek some wise counsel because sometimes interseeding can be a problem. If you leave some current plants out there, they're going to be too much competition for those new plants coming. So if you're going to do that, be really cautious before you make that decision.
All right, one last thing that I guess I wanted to bring up is prevent plant or just flat out, hey, there's a hail event and I'm just going to plow it under and call it good. I'm going to take the insurance money and I'm done for the year. Okay, you can definitely do that if you want to. And in some cases in the short term, you'll turn out ahead. But we suggest you either plant a crop, even if it's a late planted crop, and take whatever you get, or at least put a cover crop in at some point because we want to have something growing out there to keep building your soil's organic matter, to keep the mycorrhiza fungi and a whole bunch of the beneficial bacteria still alive and ready for next year's crop, maybe to provide some more nitrogen for next year's crop. Just to get yourself ready, you're going to find that you'll get a lot higher yield if you put a crop in this year or at least a cover crop.
Well, there's certainly a lot of decisions to make if it's later in the season and you're just trying to plant a crop for the first time or considering the possibility of a replant situation. So just think through those decisions carefully. There's lots of data out there to take a look at for your particular area. if you're in that kind of situation. Our strategy is just plan on a successful crop, do everything you can to get that off right, and look at the return on investment on each input that you put in, rather than setting a budget for yourself and saying, well, it's late in the year, I can only spend half as much money. That really doesn't make much financial sense.
And I guess one important thing I would leave you with is don't beat yourself up too much on this. A lot of people get so worried and so distraught by, hey, I had to replant, or boy, I couldn't get in the ground until late. You know what? That's just a part of farming. So you just have to calm down a little bit, take it easy, and do the best you can, try as hard as you can, and let it go with that.
Well, trying as hard as you can is very important if you're looking at our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
We know that the future is liquid. That's how agriculture liquid fertilizer creates the highest quality products on the market. Because we're committed to finding the best raw materials at the best price possible and getting them from us to you in the most sustainable, responsible ways possible. Agriculture liquid fertilizers, helping you grow the future.
Welcome to the 30-second tour of your local Poet plant. Local producers sell us tons of their grain. We grind it, mix it with water and special enzymes. The result is fermented, distilled, and dehydrated until it's 200 proof alcohol. Corn oil is extracted, and protein and nutrients are condensed, dried, and turned into animal feed, bringing our tour to an end with high-protein feed and cleaner-burning high-octane fuel. Visit poet.com to learn more.
A farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grid sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave P. Most of your applied P gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more P available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing P availability can lead to increased P uptake in the plant. That's more P, and more P. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your P with Avail.
Stop coring your bins with the AgriDry Gravity Grain Spreader. Traditional bin filling systems create uneven concentrations of grain and fine particulates. Uniform grain distribution allows even airflow throughout the entire bin, giving you more control over temperature and moisture content, increasing your grain quality and bottom line. Call us today for more information.
Dry Load Store, 1-855 AgriDry.
When you're out scouting your fields in the middle of the summer, chances are you're going to see some yellow here and there. You might see a little purple here and there. You're going to see some leaves, maybe even with striping, and you say, what in the world is that? And you know what? Unfortunately, even as a very trained agronomist with lots of years of experience, I can't always determine exactly what that is. So today we want to talk a little about identifying nutrient deficiencies and how to solve those nutrient deficiencies this year and in the future.
Okay, there's one big key that you need to understand. There's really two classes of nutrients. There's nutrients that are mobile within the plant, or there's immobile nutrients. They're building blocks. They're ones that absolutely stay put. So we've got mobile nutrients and non-mobile nutrients. Now, when we look at the mobile nutrients, we're looking at things like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So which ones do you think are the non-mobile? Well, it's micronutrients and secondary nutrients, of course. That's going to show up at the top of the plant because as they're put into the lower leaves, they're going to stay put. So just start with that little piece of information in mind. If you're seeing leaves that don't look quite right towards the top of the plant, hey, this is a non-mobile nutrient. Or if it's at the bottom of the plant, chances are it's NP or K.
All right, and before we go any further talking about nutrient deficiencies, we could be dealing with something else. We could be dealing with a herbicide carryover issue, a compaction issue, just the fact that, hey, we haven't had any sunlight because it's been raining for a week, so my crop looks a little pale. I mean, there are a lot of other factors here, so don't always assume it's a nutrient issue. Yes, most of the time it probably is, but this is one of the reasons why we really encourage you to do some plant tissue analysis. And especially if you see a few plants in the field that look really bad and a few plants that look fantastic, send both of them in separately. Find out why the bad plants are looking the way they are when you compare them against the good-looking plants.
We developed a helpful tool called the Ag PhD Nutrient Deficiency app. You can certainly find that for your smartphone or your tablet. If you'd like to have a reference for various crops to see, okay, what do certain nutrient deficiencies look like? Maybe I can find something that at least gets me headed down the right path, that, hey, this looks like my corn leaf, or this looks like my plants in my alfalfa field look. But again, if you don't know for sure, send in a sample for plant tissue analysis and see if it is a nutrient deficiency that's short, or work with your local university or extension agent to find out.
All right, so if the lower leaves are purple, usually we're talking phosphorus. If the lower leaves are yellow, it's either nitrogen or potassium deficiency if it's a nutrient deficiency. And with the yellowing for nitrogen, it's going to start at the tip of the leaf and work its way down the midrib, down the center of the leaf. With potassium deficiency, you'll see yellowing on the leaf margins of the lower leaves, so that's a real big difference. In terms of how we're going to fix this, yes, for this year you could do some side dressing, you could do some foliar feeding, but please understand, once you've seen a nutrient deficiency, you've already lost a whole bunch of yield. You're too late to fix that. What we usually will do is, yeah, we might try to address it a little bit this year, but more than anything, we're going to go into next year saying, hey, I was short on potassium, my plants looked horrible this year. I'm going to make sure that I test my soil good, and I'm going to get my potassium levels up to where they need to be so it doesn't happen to me again. Well, once again, nutrient deficiencies are a terrible problem all around the world. Our best suggestion for you is get out in your fields and scout them, and then in addition, do soil testing and do plant tissue testing on a regular basis, and you can solve these issues on your farm both this year and especially going forward.
When you're out in your field, make sure you're scouting for weeds like our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how to stop it coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
Farming isn't just in the land, it's in you. Take control of weeds like never before. Enlist builds on the Roundup Ready system, combining proven control of a new 2,4-D and glyphosate in Enlist Duo herbicide. Protect what matters without changing the way you farm. Talk to your seed or crop protection supplier today.
Is prickly lettuce, sometimes known as China lettuce.
All right, so this prickly lettuce, it's an annual weed, or is it? The problem with prickly lettuce, it's usually a winter annual. It also could be a biennial. All I know is the biggest challenge we have with prickly lettuce is it's big by the time we get out there either to do a burn down or our first in-crop spray, especially in corn and soybeans.
All right, so to identify it, one of the key things that I look at prickly lettuce is if you break the stem or you break one of the leaves, you're going to have some milk, kind of like a milkweed inside the plant. The other thing is the leaves are attached directly to the stem with no petioles on the lower parts of the plant. So when you look at those leaves, if you see them just hooking right up to the stem, and then when you break them off, you've got milk, chances are you're probably looking at prickly lettuce.
The flowers are yellow with a blue stripe on the underside. And let's get into control just a little bit. In corn, it's relatively easy. We like Verdict the best down, post-emerge. I personally like Status. The other products just aren't great on it. They have some activity, but they're not great.
You say it's easy to control because the number one option really does a good job. But let's just say that you really like Callisto, for example, and you have some prickly lettuce. Well, you may wipe out all the other weeds out there, but it's just not great.
Well, yeah, it's not. But
so if this is your primary weed, you really have to be selective.
Yeah,
and pick
but
a
when this
dicamba
is
product.
almost always a winter annual or biennial, then I'm not that worried about my post-killer anyway. I'm much more concerned about the burn down, the tillage I do, or just the pre-emerge herbicide I use, and that's why I would say Verdict's probably your best bet pre.
All right, let's look at wheat. I like sharpen down. That's your best bet for burn down and also a little bit of residual. In crop, Husky and Wide Match can both do a decent job. I personally like the Wide Match just a little bit better for getting prickly
Well,
lettuce
let's
under
face it
control.
though, neither one of them is outstanding, but the good news in wheat is you get that burned down at least fairly well, and then the wheat's going to choke it out. Let's go to soybeans.
All right, in soybeans, I really like our 3 pre-program for almost any weed that you can think of. My favorite product for pre-emerge use with prickly lettuce control in soybeans is Authority MTZ. I've got Authority and I've got Sencor, so I'm kind of cheating. I've got 2 different products in there, but it works pretty good. And then by far, the best option post-emerge is Roundup. So if you have Roundup Ready soybeans, that's going to be the best thing. In Liberty Link soybeans, Liberty can work as well. You just have to have good coverage and spray it fairly early.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's Weed of the Week prickly lettuce, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by CaseIH.
The AFS Connect Farm Management System from CaseIH connects you, and only you, to the information you need most from your equipment, from anywhere, at any time. AFS Connect, only from CaseIH.
Are light, fluffy soils your challenge, or are heavy, tight soils more common for you? What if you have both? That's what we faced this spring on our farm. I'll talk about how we dealt with it successfully in today's Iron Talk. I'm really positive we made the right choice with a number of modifications we made on the planter this year. One big one this spring was using Delta Force to control the downforce on each row unit. We began the season coming off a very dry winter and had a lot of what I'd call fluffy soils on the side hills and hilltops across our farm. In our valleys and heaviest soils, though, we still had some moist and more clay-like conditions. As the planter rolled across each variation in the field, we actually used the lift feature more than anything as the Delta Force adjusted to lighter and softer conditions in many areas. The result is noticeable in every field we've got. Emergence is much more even, planting depth is more even than we've had it in the past. Hopefully this fall, I'm talking about the yield differences and consistency we're seeing as a result. As conditions varied this spring, we saw a big improvement with individual row-controlled downforce management. Looks like a good return on investment that you may consider going forward as well. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now, back to the show.
With the success of the CaseIH Tiger Quad Track and Magnum Road Track tractors, it's no secret why CaseIH is the leader of the track. So it wasn't surprising when the competition started imitating us. But only CaseIH offers a 5-axle design to give you a smoother ride, more power to the ground, with less berming and compaction. Still, we're flattered. In fact, if we weren't already red, we'd be blushing.
How will you secure your farm for the future? The Quasar Chopping Cornhead from Capello USA will help. Our design is focused on efficiency, longevity, and reducing harvest loss, making the Quasar the corn harvest solution to bring your farm forward. With hundreds of units ready for immediate delivery, secure your farm's future today. Do it for your farm. Do it for them. Order now. Capello USA. Italian craftsmanship, American grit.
For lower cost, higher production, Mandaco Agri leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. Twister's ease of maintenance is forgiving and rocks and has contour conformity equaling 0 downtime. Our hydraulically adjusted coulter angles make residue management easier, less costly. Spring or fall, the Mandaco Twister vertical tillage unit is the new leader. See your Mandaco Agri dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call.
Dirty work pays. That is if your dirty work includes a Soil Max Gold Digger tile plow. Soil Max tile plows feature zero deflection technology. With the only tile plow factory paired with Ag Leader's IntelliSlope control system, you eliminate the need for grade calculations and lasers. So make your next investment in a Soil Max Gold Digger. Better yield, longer planting and harvest windows, better water management is all yours with Soil Max. Visit soilmax.com.
Looking to maximize yield? QuickRoutes from Monsanto Bioag is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. QuickRoutes continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more, and is applied to the seed so the live microorganisms go right to work enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Get QuickRoutes today.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
On your farm, you need speed and year-round effectiveness in your tillage program. The Quick Till from Norwood Sales allows you to move quickly through your fields, maximizing time and improving yield. Constructed of heavy-duty materials, the Quick Till is ideal for both spring and fall applications, from preparing a healthy seedbed early in the season to breaking up corn residue after harvest. For more information about how a Quick Till can improve fields on your farm, call Norwood Sales today.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but we invite you to tune in to the Ag PhD radio show on SiriusXM Channel 80 each weekday at 2 p.m. Central.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show where we have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Soil is nature's filter to keep contaminants out of our water. As rain falls on soil and seeps down through, the minerals and microbial life in the soil remove and detoxify nutrients as well as inorganic materials. To learn how farmers manage soil and groundwater, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.